Hello everyone and welcome back. Now, when I travel, I obviously build a small photography kit to take with me. Something flexible, something that I anticipate is going to allow me to fully capture the sights and the world around me, wherever I may be. As most of you will know, it's usually a trade-off between convenience and obviously how much I'm prepared to carry. But there's one lens that I almost always take with me, especially if it's a trip where I really want to, please excuse the pun, but where I really want to focus on the photography. Now, I should say I'm talking about a normal trip here, whatever that means these days. It's maybe like a city break, for example. I'm not talking about a dedicated wildlife session where I'll obviously pack much longer focal length lenses. I do appreciate that this lens I'm talking about is not necessarily the most convenient lens to travel with, because it isn't. But it is the one that I keep coming back to because of what it allows me to see and how it allows me to work. And over time, I think I've realized that that matters more to me than convenience or even lens specifications. So for me, that's usually a 70 to 200 millimeter. I've actually got two versions of this lens. This is the older EF version, the Canon EF 7200 f2.8L, the IS2 version, which is still an incredible lens. And I also have the newer 7200 RF version, the 2.8Z, which I'm currently using to record this video. Indeed, the reason I picked up the Z version in the RF range is mainly because of the amount of video work I'm doing these days. It's lighter, it balances better on the R5, and it just fits into my workflow that little bit more easily. But honestly, if you're just getting into this, the EF version is still fantastic and definitely worth considering if you can handle the extra weight. But I want to be clear, this isn't really a review of these specific lenses, although I may do one of those at a later date. It's more about why I keep coming back to this particular focal range and what it does to the way I shoot. Now, when you're traveling, if you're anything like me, everything feels interesting and new. But that's also the problem. There's just so much going on. It becomes very easy to take photographs that can feel busy or, if you'll excuse the pun, a little unfocused this time. I think one of the biggest challenges for photographers, particularly when they're starting out, is in clearly defining what the subject of their image actually is. Now, for sure, it might be a photograph of your partner or a building or your dog, but then my question when viewing the image often becomes, why did you include so much else in the frame? What actually is the subject? Why is there extra sky or that lamppost or distractions around the edges of the frame? Of course, I fully appreciate that sometimes these elements add context to your image, but also they can quite often dilute the image, in my opinion. For me, the process is really always the same when I'm shooting. I first define the subject, and then I simplify everything around it. And that is exactly what this lens allows me to do. Instead of trying to include everything, I can focus on what actually matters to me. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't include background or shoot wide-angle portraits when you travel, not at all. This image, for example, taken in India of a man and a cow in the street, relies entirely on the background for the context. But what the 70 to 200 does give me is the option to step back and observe quietly from a distance. It also allows you to isolate smaller details, the things that most people would simply walk past and not notice. Now, over the past 9 years that I've been documenting the city of Melbourne in what I've loosely titled the Snippets of Melbourne project, I have really enjoyed using the 70 to 200 range to isolate those details, and really has helped define my interpretation of this beautiful city. You can see the project on my commercial website if you're at all interested. I'll include a link down below. And the other thing to consider with this lens is the compression. which is essentially the effect of standing further away from your subject and zooming in. It reduces the sense of depth in the scene and visually brings background elements closer to your subject. The result of that is that the layers sort of stack together in your image in a much more controlled and intentional way. And one of the reasons I personally prefer the f2.8 version over something like the f4 is that it gives me a little bit more control over depth of field. That ability to slightly soften the background and separate the subject just that little bit more, which again helps simplify the frame and reduces distractions. Now, it's not always essential, I grant you, but when you need it, it can make, I feel, a real difference. Now, of course, the strength of this lens can also become its weaknesses. You do lose context, I suppose. You're more removed from the overall scene, and sometimes you have to work that little bit harder to actually find compositions. It's not always the easiest way to shoot, but over time I've realized that this really suits how I see. I tend to simplify things, to look for smaller moments within a bigger scene, and this focal range supports that for me perfectly. Now, I completely appreciate that this isn't the only way to shoot. It's certainly not always the right choice. There will be plenty of people who say you only need something like a 35mm lens when traveling, and I'm expecting those in the comments below. And that's absolutely fair enough. We all see and experience the world differently. And if you've watched some of my other videos on YouTube, you'll know that one of my absolute favorite lenses of all time, and one that I almost always travel with, is the wonderful 17mm tilt shift lens. But the 70-200 is still the one I also keep coming back to, not because it's the best lens, but because it consistently helps me create the kind of images that I am personally drawn to. And I think that's really the point. The gear you choose should support how you see, and not necessarily define it. And I do realise that the lenses I enjoy most won't necessarily be everyone's choice, and they're not always the most obvious or practical ones either. But they're the ones that allow me to work in a way that feels natural. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or you found my thoughts at least somewhat useful, I'd really appreciate if you gave it a like. That would be really helpful. And if you've not already subscribed, then please feel free to do so. Now, of course, I'd be really interested to hear from you. I mean, what's the one lens you can't live without and always take with you when you travel? And for that matter, why? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.